evening, everybody. Thanks for inviting me. Glad to be here. When I was first asked to do this presentation, I was just starting to look at gold in Wales, and I thought it was an interesting story to tell, and that was the plan. Since then, that interest has grown, and with some partners, we have, in the loosest sense of the word, we've set up a exploration company, and we've taken out some licenses in Wales. And regardless of COVID, we've actually managed to complete a full season of fieldwork, and we're just getting the results in. And some of the results are looking quite interesting. So we thought we'd take the opportunity to not just give a bit of background on gold in Wales generally, but also tell you about what we've been doing on the ground. And for those of you who are a bit confused, because most of you, or some of you, might be used to seeing me representing SRK. After 30 years with SRK, which have been fantastic, I'm now in my last 3 months with SRK, and at the end of this year, I'll be leaving. And the aim is not to retire, as has been reported in some press, but rather to do this sort of thing, to actually set up some companies and try and find something and make something happen. So to work on the other side of the fence, if you like, to where I've been working for the last 30 years, and try and make something happen myself with some other people. And this venture, Sarn Helen Gold, more of which we can talk about later, is one of those things. And I'm not leaving SRK for any other reason that when you get to your late 50s, you realise that it's either now or never if you're going to try and do something. So that's what I'm doing. So anyway, so just with that bit of background, the aim of this presentation, is just to talk a bit about gold in Wales, and then talk a bit about what we're actually doing on the ground. And I don't claim to be an expert on gold mineralization or Wales, and most of what I'm presenting I've learned over the last year or so. So there are other references which, if people do want to find a bit more about what I'm talking about, the references, I can provide those references to people. But anyway, yeah. So gold in Wales. Well, it's clear that gold was being mined in Wales during the Bronze Age. So for over 2,000 years, gold has been explored. And Wales, of course, didn't exist at the time. And the tribe, Wales was actually, I think I'm just conscious that some Welsh people might be on the line and might correct me, but I think there were 4 tribes in Wales at the time, and one of them were the Silures, which actually the Silurian system, geologically, was subsequently named after. But the Silures were sort of predominant in the southeast of Wales. And they were clearly mining gold. And the Romans first landed here 55 BC with Claudius, I saw at Conquered or something similar. But then he promptly got back on his boat and went back to France, having been beaten off, and then came back a year later, hung around for a while, and then had to go back to France, I think, because the Gauls were being a bit of a nuisance. No change there, I suppose. And then it wasn't for another 90 years before the Romans actually came back and actually colonized the country. And I think, whereas the first time they actually came, as I understand it, they came because the Britons had helped the Gauls in a bit of a fight with them. When they came the second time, for sure, they came because of the minerals. They came for the gold, they came for the lead, they came because they knew mining was going on. So that's why they came. And the Romans, one of the first roads and establishments they built was to South Wales. They came to South Wales. They sort of made a pact with or beat the Silures, depending on who you read. Set up a fort in Pembroke, which is a little village between Llandovery and Lampeter, and started mining on a much bigger scale than the Silures had been doing at the time. And mined there for hundreds of years, from what we understand. And the best guesses are that during that time they mined about 30,000 ounces of gold. Fairly rudimentary stuff. It was an open pit, site. They were sort of heating up the rock with fires, pouring water over it, sort of freeze-thaw type thing with the rocks breaking up and making it easier to hit. So I'm recovering probably mainly free gold because the gold in the Jollicoffey area, which is where they went, which is, I say, in South Wales, it's a mixture of gold in quartz veins, which is free, and gold that's wrapped up in pyrite and pyrrhotite. But that pyrite and pyrrhotite in its surface would have been weathered, so I think they probably recovered gold from a mixture of the two. But anyway, they were the first guys here to mine it on an industrial scale. Now, how do I move this on, guys? So once the Romans left, to be honest, not much happened for an awful long time. But one important thing that did happen was that in 1688, the Royal Mines Act was passed, and what that did was it essentially passed all gold and silver to the Crown. And since 1760, that's actually been administered by what's called the Crown Estate, and currently Wardell Armstrong acts on their behalf. And this act covers England, Wales, Scotland, most of Scotland, not all, and Northern Ireland. And while that may seem a bit severe, in actual fact, that's actually really helped exploration, because what that means is that if you're exploring for gold and silver in the UK, you can obtain what's called an option agreement, and that option agreement means that you have an option, and a sole option, so you've got sole right to apply to construct a mine within 3 years, and it can be extended for another 3 years. So essentially, you've got 6 years to apply to build a mine, and no one else has that for the area that you take out. So someone else can explore in your area. They can take out licenses, they can do what they want, but they can't apply to build a mine. So you have that security that you can do the exploration that you want to do, knowing that you're the only person that can, apply to build a mine. And while that might seem fairly straightforward and normal, that's not the case for anything else, any other mineral in the UK other than oil and gas. So if you want to explore for tin or copper or whatever in the UK, there is no such thing as an exploration agreement or an option agreement, and you have to make an agreement with the mineral rights owner, which may or may not be the landowner. So it's a real effort, if you're exploring in the UK, to find out, to establish who owns the mineral rights, secure an agreement with those people, give you comfort that you can carry on doing the work and do the work. Whereas for gold and silver, at least you can apply for these option agreements, which gives you security of tenure. So even though it effectively nationalised gold and silver, it actually is really helpful from an exploration point of view, and means that we can now explore with the comfort that we're the only people that can apply for a mine on our licenses. And this slide, what this slide does, I printed this slide off from the Mines Royal website yesterday, even though it says 2nd of August there. That's just simply because they don't update it very often. This shows the current licenses, or option agreements as they're called, that exist in Wales. And we're going to talk about Sarn Helen gold later, and the agreements that we have are the red ones down in the southwest corner. And when you take out an option agreement, you can take up to 250 square kilometres, and the price is the same if you take 1 square kilometre or 250 square kilometres. So we've taken out 4 250 square kilometre licenses to explore in Pembroke. And the licenses that are halfway up there in Wales, you can see where Alba Mineral Resources have their licenses around the Harlech Dome. There's a small license at Anglesey because they're obviously hoping that there's some gold there. And essentially they're the 3 areas. I mean, the 2 real areas are South Wales, mid to North Wales around the Harlech Dome, and then we have Anglesey as well. So these are the current existing option agreements with the Crown Estate. Right, now which button do I press, guys? Anyone want to gamble? That one?
I think it was page down, was it?
Yeah. This one? Okay. So that was a bit of a digression, but it's an important one because, as I say, that the sorting out of the Crown Estate is very beneficial to us. So again, not much, as I said, happened after the Romans left, and then moving on into the mid 1800s. At that time, there were some copper and lead mines working around the Dolgellau area, which is up in sort of North Wales, where you can see the yellow dot that says Pembroke mine. And they were having a bit of a problem in their processing, and they asked the process engineer to come up and have a look, and he found that there was gold in the recovery system, which led him then to produce a paper which said that Wales has got huge gold potential, which spurred a lot of interest. In the same year, the Geological Survey, BGS I think it's now, reported it had found gold down at Dollicothy. Not a huge surprise, obviously. But these articles sparked a lot of interest and actually regenerated gold exploration in Wales. But just while I'm on this slide, just to say a couple of things, you can see down in the bottom, there's the cold measures, in yellow and grey there, that sort of shape, that kidney shape at the bottom, that's where the coal outcrop is. The sort of purple and blues in the middle are their Ordovician Silurian sediments, named after the Silures tribe and also the Ordovices tribe, were in Mid Wales. And then Clogau mine up in the north, and the green rocks are Cambrian sediments. So in fact, the gold mineralisation up in Clogau mine in the north is in Cambrian shales, whereas the mineralisation of Dollicothy further down is in Silurian sediments. So, and then perhaps the other thing to point out on this map before we move on is that in black are a lot of the structures and sutures in Wales. And as you can see, there's a whole sweeping system of these things that come down sort of north-south, and as they get towards Pembroke, they start to go sort of more east-west, these major faults. And if you look down towards Pembroke, which is the bit right on the far west at the bottom, for those of you who don't know Wales, you'll see there's a little clutch of rocks around that area, which are very similar to the rocks around Dollicothy mine. And again, we'll come back to those later. So, as I said, basically in Wales, there have been two areas where gold has been mined and where there's gold interest. One is, and it's all very confusing because you have Dolgellau up north, and the main mine is called Clogau, and then you have Dollicothy in the south, and the main mine is called Ogilvie. So it's all a bit confusing to non-Welsh, but at the end of the day, I think you just have to think of there's an area in the north and an area in the south. The area in the north of Clogau, which I'm going to talk about briefly now, is the area where Alba Mineral Resources currently have their setup. And in this area, there have been many deposits found in this area, but the two mines, the two deposits that stand out are Clogau from David officially, Clogau and Gwynfrynedd. And two periods of mining, started off, in the 19th century, early 20th century. That was when the main mining took place in this area, following that sort of spark of interest in the mid-1800s. And it's estimated that about 130,000 ounces of gold was mined in this area at that time, mainly from Clogau and Gwynfrynedd, and mainly from Clogau, which I think most people think about 80,000 ounces has been mined. And certainly Clogau is the biggest gold producer in the UK to date. Gwynfrynedd was opened again in the 1980s, shut again, produced a few thousand more ounces. Clogau was also briefly worked in the 1960s, opened again, closed again, opened again. But they've not quite had the same mining as was going on in the late 1800s. Currently, Alba Mineral Resources are up there doing a lot of exploration work, both drilling and also surface sampling, and trying to both reopen the mine and look for extensions in the mine, but also look in the wider area. And just briefly on the Clogau geology, and even though I'm not a geologist, I'm not a gold geologist especially, particularly I suppose, but the gold in Dolgellau, it's in quartz sulfide veins. It's hosted, as I said, by Cambrian shales. It's renowned for being very spotty. It's renowned for having sort of bonanza areas, low-grade areas in between. It's that classic thing, drill for structure, sample, mine for grade. It's very difficult, I think, to build up resource estimates. So it's about finding the structures, working out where the structures are, and then following those structures. And if you follow all those press releases, you see that's kind of the way they're going. They're looking for the structures and hoping that they'll then find the bonanza areas, which I'm sure is the right thing to do. Gold veins themselves, they trend east-northeast in that area. They vary in width from almost nothing to tens of meters. And quite complex mineralogy in the veins, but the gold is fairly easy to separate. So then if we move down to Dollar Coffee, so Dollar Coffee is the area where the Romans first went in the south. And again, not much happening until the 1800s. And then mining started, or people started to try and reopen the mines, find what they were doing, all a bit sporadic. And I've said there on this slide, mining started in 1887 and until 1912. I mean, there were actually like 3 or 4 companies that tried to get this thing going during that time, and only about 100 ounces was produced in total. It was quite difficult, I think. Then a company, I think, sat back, Roman Deach Limited, did some exploration, looked properly, tried to produce a resource, I guess, as we would call it now, and actually mined a reasonable amount of gold, 250,000 ounces reportedly. And that was in the sort of mid 1930s, and then that mining carried on essentially up until the start of the Second World War. And the difference with the mineralisation at Dollar Coffee compared to the mineralisation at Dolgetlau is that portion of the gold is locked up within pyrite and pyrrhotite. Not so much locked up, but it's really fine along fractures. And so what the mine was doing in the 1930s is they were recovering. And it's in quartz veins, but there's also a certain amount of mineralization that's in the sulfides. And they were recovering a certain amount of free gold, but there was a certain amount of gold that was also locked up in the pyrite and the arsenopyrite. And that material was being sent to Germany to be processed. So at the outset of the Second World War in 1939, that became a bit difficult. And the mine essentially stopped at the outset of the Second World War. It was still on reef at the time, as we would say. But that was the problem. There's a slightly more of a processing challenge, and some of the gold is free, some requires extracted from the arsenopyrite. And then subsequent to that, Anglo-Canadian exploration, and this is now getting to my time. I was at Cardiff University in 1980. And my lecturer, Alwyn Annals, had permission from Anglo-Canadian exploration to run their exploration in South Wales around the Dollar Coffee area. So we used to be sent out to log core and take samples and soil samples and all that kind of stuff. So that was what I was doing in my summer vacations in the early 1980s, working for Anglo-Canadian exploration, getting a bit of side money by taking trips underground from tourists who were quite happy to part with their money. I was only being paid £5 a day, so much to that. So yeah, the Anglo-Canadian explored for quite a long time, drilled several holes, didn't really make a huge amount of progress and left. Anglesey Mining then did some more drilling and took it on from there. But essentially, since Anglesey Mining left, there's been very little or no work done on the ground. And in fact, as I say, when I was at university in the early 80s, we were using Dollar Coffee as a field centre. So the geologists would go and practice mapping, the mining engineers would practice sort of pulling out muck out of underground, surveyors would be surveying the underground. So it was our field centre there. Oh, Nate, how do I go back?
Remember that is on here?
Page down.
Page up.
There we go. So yeah, just perhaps just quickly on the geology of Dollar Coffee, the mineralisation there, as I say, I think I've kind of talked to it on the way. It's a mixture of gold in veins that are in sort of dilation zones, and the idea basically is the shells are tightly folded, created dilation zones. There were some big sutures, as we saw earlier, coming through Wales. They acted as conduits for the mineralisation. They found some pressure shadows in the saddle reefs and that sort of thing, deposited gold. And then a certain amount of gold that's disseminated in the host shales, in the pyrite and arsenopyrite. So it's a bit of a mixture of the two. The main target was what's called the Roman lode. That was still in the faith when the mine was shut before the start of the war. And then during the war, the mine was left to flood. So the thought of reopening it after the war was just too big a deal, really. They just decided it wasn't worth trying to pump out. But I think the point is that the gold here is, I suppose the fundamental difference between the two areas, my understanding is, I may be wrong, is that whereas at Dolgetlau, it's fairly free gold, but it's really spotty. If you come to Dollar Coffee, the grades are lower, a bit more consistent, but we do have the issue that some of that gold is locked up in the pyrite and the arsenopyrite. So that's the fundamental difference between the two. So that's a potted history of where gold mining has been in Wales. And now I'm just going to take the opportunity to tell you what we've been doing with Sarn Helen Gold. So Sarn Helen Gold is a company that we set up a year and a half ago. And we essentially, the premise was, in South Wales, there can't just be one gold mine. You know, there can't just be gold on the line. The Romans clearly went in there because gold was at surface. The ancient Britons, the Silures, they were mining it because it was at surface. But there's got to be other gold mineralization there. And so let's look for similar rocks with similar structures and try and see if we can find another one. It's got to be there somewhere. We don't know where. That was the premise of setting up Sarn Helen Gold. And Sarn Helen is sort of a path that comes down through Wales that goes through the gold mining areas and actually comes through the Dolycothe area, and that's where we've named it Sarn Helen Gold. It was after St. Helen, is that right? So we've set up Sarn Helen Gold. Now, then the next thing was, okay, we think there's more mineralization here. What do we do first? Now, what happened was that even though the government made it extremely difficult to explore for metals in the UK by not having a mineral rights process, and therefore exploration in the UK in the 50s, 60s, 70s was almost kind of non-existent, they did set up these mineral reconnaissance programs through the British Geological Survey. And their aim was to try to, I don't know whether it's stated, but I think their aim was basically to do the groundwork exploration that an exploration company would struggle to do, given that in order to do that it would have to make deals with all sorts of landowners. So it will do the basic groundwork of the exploration. It will go to areas and look at things that are a bit of a long shot and try to see if there's gold or copper or silver, whatever it might be, in the area, and try to produce reports that would encourage companies to explore, having given them the groundwork of what they've done. And they produce a whole stream of reports, which are a fantastic archive actually, and it's worth picking through those. I don't know if any of you have ever done them, but these reports are a treasure chest, really. So we went through all the reports that we could find in South Wales, and there are several, in fact, 3 key reports that have been written on gold potential in South Wales. We went through those reports and we used the results of these reports, plus the fact that we knew what we were looking for in terms of the rocks and the structures, to identify areas where we were going to take out our option agreements. And these are the 3 reports that we took. All of them were done in the 1990s. And our first aim was, and a couple of these reports are quite general, but one of them actually undertook a stream sediment sampling survey and a soil sampling survey and recovered gold in an area to the northwest of Haverford West. So they found gold in the streams. They panned gold, but they didn't go the next stage of looking for where that gold came from. So they identified the fact there was gold in streams. The rocks are actually very similar to the rocks at Pembroke and Dolycothe, so it looks quite nice, but they didn't follow up, to where that came from. That wasn't their job. They saw their job is to set the scene. So we used these 3 reports. We took out our license areas. So just a bit of a blurb about us. So we're Welsh-based, Welsh-run. We've got 4 option agreements. So we've got 4 250 square kilometre option agreements, which totals about 1,000 square kilometres. Spent a lot of time looking at the information that the Geological Survey had, but also Cardiff University, because Cardiff University collected a lot of data during the time we worked at Oliver. And we were looking for simple use of that mineralisation. So we spent a lot of time looking at that. And amazingly, we got out into the field this year. So we've employed 3 postgraduate geologists. We rented a couple of places in Haverford West, and we took on 6 students, undergraduates, on placement. And we've been working there between July and September, and we're just starting to get the data in from that work. For those of you who are financially interested, we have SEIS status, which basically means that people who invest in the company can claim back a certain amount of the money against tax to investors. So it makes it more attractive as an investor to invest in our company. We started off with 4 people who put in a certain amount of money to get the company going, and we now have 26 shareholders. We raised £250,000 to do the exploration. We're gradually working through that now. This is a bit of an advert, I suppose. It's a long mining history in Wales. We try to make it very Welsh focused. We're using the University of Wales. I did my degree there. I lectured there. Obviously, it's close to us. We're using their XRD as a check on XRF, to check on our XRF results. We have a portable XRF site, and we're using their XRF to check the results again. We're engaging with the local community regularly, because even though we have an option agreement, we still have to get permission to access the land where it's exploring, and that's actually a big part of what we do. And we're putting aside a percentage of all the money we spend so that we can put that back into the community. Don't yet know, of course, which community that's going to go into, but we are putting it aside as we go along. So why Pembroke? So this slide here, I did show you them earlier with the Mines Royal side, but this slide here shows our option agreements there in the southwest in blue. We've talked about the rock types already. Those little yellow symbols, circles everywhere, that's work that was done by the Geological Survey. That's soil sampling work they did, where they found gold. So as you can see, they found a lot of success with gold in Pembroke, which is why we took out those licenses. And the basic premise was, look for Silurian Ordovician shales, look for areas where they've been tightly folded, look for areas where there's a complex structure, pick up on the work done by BGS where they found gold, see if we can replicate the work that was done by BGS, and then to see where we go from there. And the aim of the first field season was, I suppose, essentially to try to replicate the BGS work and get comfortable ourselves that there was gold in our areas. So yeah, so we'd identified our areas. So this shows where we've got to. And I wouldn't underestimate this issue of engaging with local landowners. I mean, it's this in the UK, because everyone has such a small parcel of land compared to where you have around the world. It takes a long time to get comfort and support and make sure people don't think we're going to build a gold mine tomorrow. And so we're deliberately trying to sort of keep the profile relatively low, but at the same time convey that we are optimistic where we're going. So we've done concentrate sampling in the areas that Geological Survey had. We've tested all the samples we've collected using our XRF, and we've sent samples off to ALS to do fire assay to follow up on that. Long-term plan, is to continue that stream sediment sampling to broader areas. We've only done some areas at the moment, and quite frankly, the next step will probably be deciding if we need to drill. At the end of the day, there's only so much we can do from surface. We're going to have to identify the structures. There's a lot of information there from the Geological Survey, from geophysical work they've done. So we've got all the information we need, and at some point we're going to have to make a bit of a gamble on where we drill. We have longer term aims. I think we're trying to be honest with ourselves that if we find something, we'll follow it up. If we don't find something, then we'll move on and look somewhere else. We're not just going to just say Wales is it, and that's it. If we find something, that's great. If we don't, we'll move on. So what do we say? Well, we've established agreements with our landowners. We've got a field office in Haverfordwest. We've engaged Expression Services to sort of provide a bit of health and safety instruction to us. And Nick actually came and taught our guys how to pan in Kirani, so we're very helpful. We did pay him. And in total now we've collected over 4,000 soil samples, 150 hardware samples. From our we identified three areas. All of those samples we've analysed using the XRF, and we've sent 400 samples off to ALS in Galway now for fire assay and ionic leach. So our plan is to compare the two assaying methods and see which one is most appropriate for our area. This is a sort of a zoom in on Pembroke, which kind of shows you where those samples are, and you can see there's sort of 3 target areas there that we've identified initially. There's a Clarveston area in the south. That little indent at the bottom is where Haverfordwest is. Clarveston is the northeast of that. That's where the Geological Survey has done quite a bit of work and recovered gold in streams. Trefgarn is like to the northwest. There's anomalies there from both gold anomalies and arsenic anomalies from work that was done by the BGS, and you can see we've done quite a bit of sampling in those areas. And then we also have another area up in the Basilis, where we like that area because there's an old silver mine slightly further to the east, and we're kind of exploring up towards that. But also that area is common land, so we can actually explore there without getting permission from landowners. So what we've been kind of doing is using that as a bit of a buffer as we've been getting permissions, and we've been infilling in the facilities. But as I say, as you get further east, it starts to look quite interesting. And then this is just zooming in on Claveston, and this slide does a few things. So this is a picture of the Claveston area, which is that area to the northeast of Pembroke West. And the areas in green are the areas where we have landowner permission to work on their land. The areas in brown are where we're in discussion, we don't have it. And if you look at the lines on that, you can see the number of people that we have to interact with. So the coloured diamonds there show the gold counts that we've covered in the concentrates that we've taken in those streams. So we're recovering gold in those streams. The size of the triangle obviously shows how many grains we recovered in each case. It's not overly scientific, it's just literally grains in pound concentrates. And then you can see the individual little dots are where we've taken up follow-up soil samples that we've subjected to XRF, and they're the ones we're now considering sending off to ALS and Galway. You can see there are some areas where we still need, particularly in the south there, where we need to obtain access so we can follow up properly on these results. But that's kind of where we are. So we know there's gold there in the streams, but we don't yet know where that's coming from. And then this is a similar sort of Trefgarn summary, and this is pretty well all soil sampling in the Trefgarn area so far. But as you can see, that's split up into 3 areas, but there's some nice little sort of anomalies coming out here already to the bottom of Roach at the bottom there. We know, for example, that the bottom of this area down here, that line, the bottom is a shear zone. You can see it's trending the direction of the shear zones we know trend in this area. We don't yet have access to the south of that shear zone, so we're going to have to follow up on those grades. And the Plumstone Mountain area is actually an area we chose because we knew from work done by BGS there was an arsenic anomaly there, and we chose that area to compare the ionic leach assaying with fire assaying. So the first samples we've got from ALS, we've taken samples for ionic leach and separate samples for conventional fire assay. And we just got those results back so we can compare them now and see which of those methods suits us best. And we got some interesting results up in Maiden Castle as well. So next steps, well, we need to look at the results. So we're just getting back. We have the first lot. We just got the first lot back from ALS, but they're primarily ones where we just compare with fire assay and ionic leach. We need to extend the pan concentrate sampling now to wider areas that have been done by BGS. So far, we've really just tried to replicate their work. And we started to identify sort of broader areas of interest that we're interested in to extend our where we're focused. As I said, at the moment, we've been focused very much on where we have results. And these are our sort of broader areas of interest in red there. You can see the sampling that we've done today and where we plan to go next. So early stage, this is the last slide. Early stage still, but some interesting results, and hopefully we'll give you some feedback in 6 months or a year to tell you where we got. Thank you. Thank you.